So, what the fuck did I test this week, and how did it turn out? So, I tested all the Mundus stones. That went pretty similarly to stamina as expected. And then I tested some of the trait combinations as well as trait and Mundus stone combinations. Now, I wasn't able to test charge to the fullest extent and infused. So these are the two variables that I still have not accounted for fully. So I don't want today to be about what's BIS, more so what did I find to be best in what I tested. So again, on Monday or Tuesday, I will be talking again a little bit more about this with adding the infused and charged into the equation so that we can get a more holistic view at these things. I might test Nern as well, but it's going to follow the same thing with stamina where it does really, really poorly. And it'll be beaten by charge this time because Magicka builds have a lot of really powerful tools with applying status effects. Like if you use Wall of Fire, you get 20% bonus damage with your blockade or your unstable, which both do insane DPS, usually 1 or 2 on your DPS recap if you're keeping it up properly. And then charged or shock concussed, that applies minor vulnerability, which gives everyone attacking that target 8% bonus DPS for the duration. And charged with a shock enchant, yeah, we're gonna lose that berserker enchant, but since we're gonna be applying concussed op so much, it's gonna make up for it, and we're gonna be able to take that DPS loss so the group can take a gain. So I'm really excited to look at that. I've already tested a lot with it. With just a shock enchant on the charge status effect, you have an 84% chance to apply concussed every 4 seconds. If all you're doing is light attacking, that's it. And then when you add Force Pulse into the mix, that's another, I believe that's 34% or 33% chance to proc, or 43% chance to proc concussed. So when you're using all of these things like Wall of Lightning, Dots, Force Pulse, and the shock enchant, you're going to keep up concussed 100% of the time, which means everyone's getting minor vulnerability. And if you're using Lightning Wall of Elements, or if a group mate is using it, we're going to activate something called Off Balance, which makes the enemy take 70% bonus damage from the next heavy attack. Or if anyone has the Exploiter passive in the Ritual Tree, you'll gain 10% free DPS against that target for the duration. So that'll last 4 seconds, and the enchant cooldown has a 4-second ICD. So as long as you're keeping up momentum and you're constantly dealing damage to your target, you're going to keep up concussed 100% of the time, meaning you're going to have minor vulnerability and Off Balance or Exploiter passive active 100% of the time if used in tandem with a Lightning Wall. So those will heavily change results in terms of what's BIS. But at the same time, it's kind of like Sharpened, where it falls into this realm of, is it really always important? Because it's something like a Night Mother's Gaze or a Sunder Flame, where only one person needs to wear this set or this combo in order for the entire raid or group, depending on how large you are, to utilize that power. So if you have multiple people doing it, you get into this realm of redundancy where you're not doing anything special. You're just reapplying the same thing over and over again. And since the major minor buff system exists in ESO, there's no point to stacking similar things. So you can't reapply concussed with a gain. All it does is refresh the duration. But if one person is keeping it up 100%, there's no benefit of that. So that's going to be something to heavily keep in mind with the charge trait, and it's going to be why it's going to be so fucking powerful, especially when we look at it in solo play, because as a Nightblade, or pretty much as anyone, you're not going to be applying minor vulnerability that frequently unless you're a Sorc using Force Pulse. So since I did most of my testing on the Nightblade, where I'm using Funnel Health, now I did use Force Pulse in the Scathing Mage thing, we'll talk about that, but we'll see. Concussed isn't up that much, so gaining charged is going to really change up variability and dynamics with how powerful are traits. But we'll have to keep that in mind that, hey, this is a one and done sort of thing where it's like only one person needs to use this and not everyone in the world. So Magicka is a little bit more convoluted than Stamina because we have way more diversity than Stamina, so that's going to change up a lot of things, especially from class to class. We have way more gear options than Stamina, so every time you change your gear, your CP allocation might or might not change depending on what kind of bonuses you get. So if you have more crit, that changes the importance of crit hit damage, so you might change your CP. Or if you have less penetration, that means you need more erosion or Elfborn or whatever. So since we have so many fucking options to run as a Magicka build, that's also going to really convolute the power of these bonuses, these Mundus stones and traits. So today, again, isn't going to be about what's best. What should I be running? What should I tell everyone to run? What is ideal? Because it's very, very situational. We talked a lot about that with the Stamina setup, where things are very reliant on what content we're doing, what group we're with, all that sort of stuff. So please keep in mind that you need to address Magicka the same way. You have to realize, all right, am I in a group with lots of penetration? Maybe I don't need Lover. Maybe I don't need all these fancy things. Am I in a group with aggressive Warhorn? Oh, hey, Precise is really OP now. So it's going to be stuff to talk about, and I will constantly hammer that into your head, hopefully that it's like, do you have the answers for these questions so that you can make these on the fly? Like understanding where do these traits or Mundus stones become more powerful, so you may approach that in your own game time and be able to tackle content on the fly instead of, oh, I have to open up a guide or ask a question every time I'm doing something different. So learning, learning, learning. That's always my goal. So as for Mundus stones, I guess we'll start with the most controversial one, and that's Lover. So a lot of people were like, ooh, we're getting a penetration Mundus that's going to make up for the sharpened loss, all of these wonderful things. But the one thing that Magicka builds have more than Stamina is penetration, innate penetration. And by innate, that means built in, or something you have all along. So if we open up our skills, and we go to the armor skill line, and we look at concentration, we gain 4,884 penetration just for wearing 5 pieces of light armor. And this passive is why penetration is not going to be nearly as important for Magicka builds as it is Stamina. As Stamina builds, you're always wearing penetration gear. Sunder, Night Mothers, Spriggans, Twiceborn, or not Twiceborn, Twin Fang. All of your Abyss sets have penetration. Magicka builds are not like that at all, because we have this massive power spike called concentration. So Lover also falls under the same thing, is where penetration is not going to be as beneficial to us in terms of a new stat increase. Obviously, penetration is always important until you hit penetration cap. But in terms of comparing how powerful these stats are that we're going to be comparing to Thief and Shadow, Lover just isn't bringing it to the table because we have that concentration passive. Now, that doesn't mean Lover is bad. Again, when I was investigating these, Lover was very, very close to Thief and Shadow. But unlike Stamina, Lover was actually losing to Thief in many instances. And that's partly because Stamina has more crit accessible to them. So if you stack a lot of crit and you don't have high crit hit damage, crit chance becomes kind of redundant, where it's like, oh, I'm gaining, yeah, sure, I'm critting all the time, but my crits don't hit that hard, so it's kind of whatever. So the same thing happens, but in reverse for Magicka, where our base crit is quite low. I don't have the Thief, I'm just wearing 5 pieces of light armor, I'm missing gear, I'm not wearing a weapon or anything of the sort, and I'm only at 60% crit chance. And that's as a Nightblade, so we even have more than other classes. Most classes will have about 50 to 55% base crit. So that means Thief is going to be a really big power spike, and Lover is going to lose out to Thief and Shadow in most situations. Now, the one place that Lover will remain dominant is PvP, because a lot of people stack more mitigation there, especially to fight against casters, because casters are very powerful playstyles in PvP, mainly group PvP, and solo casters are very difficult. They're kind of more punished. They're still very powerful, but in group PvP, I mean, the one ultimate that sums up Zerging experience is Eye of the Storm. So what's the best way to counter that? Well, since you can't block it, it's stack a lot of mitigation. So Lover, as the person doing Eye of the Storm is going to be a really big boon for you, because it's going to cut through a lot of those defenses that people are trying to bolster up with when you're fighting them. So Lover is really strong in PvP, and it's also very good for consistency in PvE. So if you're a solo player and you don't have a lot of penetration, like maybe you don't have major fracture or breach built into your kit, so like a Nightblade. Maybe I don't want to use Mark Target, maybe I don't want to use Elemental Drain. Maybe my bars are full and I don't have room for anything. Well, then Lover is going to be really great because I'm missing a lot of penetration. The same is going to fall for other classes like the Sork, who doesn't have that built in. The Warden will, or might, depending on morph options. So the Lover can be very strong. And the other thing is it's very reliable. You don't have to worry about chance interactions in order to gain that power. Things like Thief and Shadow operate off of chance, so they have a chance to become useless or very powerful. And many people, depending on what kind of content are doing, might not appreciate that. So if you're doing Maelstrom Arena and you're just trying to complete and you don't want to rely on that really big crit, or your heals critting when you need them to, then Lover is going to be very strong for you, because you don't have to rely on anything that's out of your control sort of thing. You know the extent of your power, and you're able to capitalize on that. Versus Thief and Shadow, I don't know when I'm going to crit. I don't know when I'm not going to crit. It's just going to happen or it doesn't. So those are two stats that are very fluctuative in terms of how powerful they are. So that's also going to change results. If I'm doing a 10-second fight or a 30-second fight and I get really unlucky, then Thief and Shadow might look like complete garbage because I wasn't able to roll the dice properly, because I had such a short target number where I didn't let my results reach what they should be because I just rolled the dice and I didn't get lucky. Versus in long fights, that's when crit and crit hit damage really start to shine, because that's when they start to stabilize to their real values. So if you have a 70% crit chance and you do 1,000 hits, more than likely you're going to crit 700 times because you had so many chances to do that you're able to get in line with that. So in terms of order, Shadow, again, the clear winner. I mean, if you saw me open up my character screen, you're like, oh, he has Shadow. Why? Probably because it's the best. Because that's what I logged off with, because that's what I did most of my testing was with Shadow. Shadow is really, really, really strong, especially after the precise buff. This thing is just nuts. Even losing penetration, I'm nowhere near penetration cap. Well, no, I shouldn't say nowhere. I'm about 13 to 15k depending on CP allocation. So I'm missing another 3 to 5k, which is quite a bit of damage, about 10% at the 5k mark. But still, Shadow and Precise, we're beating everything else because it's just so powerful in terms of how high we can get our crit chance and how hard our crits are hitting that we can make up for things. And since I did test on longer parses, such as the 6 million dummy and the 25.8 million dummy, those crit values really got in line to where they should be. Instead of doing a burst parse where it was like 20-30 seconds, I was able to see the results. So again, if I'm doing Maelstrom Arena, maybe I don't want to rely on crit hit damage and I want to just crit more often, so I take Thief. Or maybe I don't want to rely on that at all, so I'll take Lover. So again, Shadow, clear winner. Now, the DPS difference, let me just pull out my notebook here quick. We will look at screenshots again like we did last time. I have way more, but I'll kind of breeze through them because I know not everyone wants to stare at the math and be like, what do I care? Just tell me. So I did almost 32k, 31.8k with the Thief setup with the classic double sharp, like just logging on to the PTS from what gear I had before. I had the Thief Mundus Stone, I had dual sharp staves, everything was hunky-dory, and it did 31.8k, and that was in Juliano. So I kept things consistent. I didn't want to use Scathing for this because that's going to change up my results, and it's going to show different DPS fluctuations because it has a percent chance to proc. So I used a very consistent set, which was Juliano's. Then when I swapped to Lover, I did again double sharp with Lover, and I jumped up all the way to 32.4k. So in this instance, Lover did beat Thief because I had so much crit because Julianos has a lot of crit built into it. But then when I started changing my traits, that was when we started seeing a lot of different power. So in terms of you're just going into the Horns of the Reach patch, you're keeping everything the same, you don't want to change gear, then Lover is going to be the second best for you if you're just rocking a basic Julie setup, going with dual sharp, all that sorts of. But then when I swapped to Shadow with 2 sharpened, I jumped all the way up to 32.7k. So 300 DPS ahead of Lover and almost 1000 DPS ahead of Thief, so 900 DPS, which is a pretty big DPS difference, but again, it's nothing dramatic, it's nothing insane where it's like, oh hey, I'm not using the right Mundus Stone, now I'm never going to be able to clear content. It's very, very in line with other ones, and they all have their own advantages. So like Lover gives really high damage, you're not going to crit as much, obviously, all that sorts of stuff, but it gives consistent results, and you get close to penetration cap, which is optimal. But it doesn't apply to healing because it's penetration. It goes off of damage. So you're going to be very weak in terms of self-healing and stuff. Meanwhile, Thief applies to damage and healing. It gives you a chance to gain a bonus modifier depending on your crit hit damage. The base is 50% bonus of whatever the base was, which is a pretty big deal, especially in healing. Your burst heal can go from 10k to 15k in a chance of a roll. That's a pretty big deal, so that can save your life quite consistently. And then with Shadow, yeah, we're not going to have as much crit chance with Thief, but when we do crit, we're going to get a monstrous bonus to that, an 18.3% bonus if we're rocking the ideal 7 Divines. So they all have their advantages, and you're going to have to choose from that sort of thing. But in terms of when we start changing traits as well, that's when we're going to see a lot of deviation, especially when we change traits and gear sets. A lot of these orders will change. And I did do something differently with this testing, as I changed my CP every time I changed my gear. I had my, I used a Sayers calculator for this one because it's a lot easier. My homebrewed program takes a long time. It's janky. It requires stupid inputs. I'm probably just going to get rid of it because the Sayers is smarter than I am, quite frankly, in terms of the in-game mathematics. I obviously will always fact-check them, though, but when I was doing that, I just had the little browser in the back doing all of the inputs, like changing, oh, hey, my crit changed 3% this time, or I gained 1,000 extra penetration. So my CP was completely optimal to the trait and gear and Mundus setup this time. So it was a wholly representative situation. And we saw everything is very, very close, except for the lowest of the low, which is like really bad sets like War Maiden, and it's stupid shit like that. So I forgot to test some of the extra Mundus Stones, the Mage and the Apprentice. I totally had forgotten that they actually got buffed. And the order isn't going to change too dramatically to what I said, but I've come back after doing like another 6 hours of testing or whatever. I also gained some new insights on other traits that I'll also add as a separate thing once I get to that in the original video. In terms of order, when I looked at the Mage and the Apprentice is doing really, really well. And I have the order here. I'm not going to talk about screenshots and a lot of stuff because I've already talked quite a bit about it in the original video. But Shadow is still winning at pretty much no matter what. As long as you're rocking Precise, even if you're not rocking Precise, when I run Dual Sharp, even Shadow wins there because that extra 18% crit hit damage is just a really big boon this patch. And then second place is kind of dependent on what's going on. So if you're a Nightblade or a Templar and you have a lot of crit hit damage built into your kit, especially if you're using Minor Force, then Thief is going to win for you in terms of second place. It's not going to beat Shadow, but it's going to be a very, very strong second place, and it's going to be very, very consistent. It's going to constantly be pulling relatively the same DPS instead of having large fluctuations like Shadow might, because it's very reliant on how lucky your crit rolls are. Second place may also end up to Apprentice, which is kind of surprising for me. I wasn't expecting it to do so well, but it did really, really well, especially in solo play, because we don't have things like Aggressive Warhorn or someone giving us Guard or maybe Twilight Remedy. So Minor Force is a very hard to get buff for Magicka builds if you're not running Trap Beast, which most of us aren't this patch because we need defenses. So Apprentice ends up winning in solo application because, again, we don't have that minor force. Now, in a group where you have access to minor force, Thief will instantly take over Apprentice, and it can just win with just having aggressive Warhorn alone. So that is something to keep in mind, that these Mundus stones, their values will change depending on group content, stuff like that. And I try and hint at that as much as possible in the video and talk about instances where that may happen. So Shadow, then Thief or Apprentice, depending on stuff. If you're solo, Apprentice. If you're in group, then Thief. Third place goes to whatever one we talked about. So we'll say third place is ignoring Thief and Apprentice. We'll kind of call that a tie for second. And then next becomes Mage. So Mage, the max Magicka bonus that we're going to get out of Mage, actually does pretty well. And it'll scale decently in group if you have things like Warhorn, because you get that 10% max Magicka bonus, especially if you're a High Elf or a Dunmer, because max Magicka amps. Nightblades or Sorks, because you get 8% bonus Magicka, so Mage is doing pretty well. It's actually beating Lover for us because, again, I talked about it earlier, we have so much innate penetration between CP, light armor, all that sorts of stuff, that Lover is really not going to do too hot unless you're not running Major Breach. So if you're completely solo and you don't have Breach, then Lover will beat the Mage, and it'll also probably beat whatever was in third place. So in solo play, it'll probably beat Thief. So it'll, if you're completely solo, not running Breach, it's going to be Shadow, then Apprentice, then Lover, then Thief, then Mage. And then if you're in a group, then it's going to become Shadow, then Apprentice, or then if you're in group, it's going to become Shadow, Thief, Apprentice, Mage, and then Lover is going to be in last place in a group, especially in a group, because you have a lot of armor or spell resistance reductions from Major Breach, Minor Breach, Alkash, Infused Crusher Enchant, all of these lovely things that our group mates can give to us. So that's the updated order in terms of all of the Mundus stones that we would be using. The one advantage that Mage does have is it's going to apply to everything we do. So damage shields. If we're a Sork using pets, it's going to be the only Mundus stone aside from Thief that scales with, because pets do not use spell damage. They do inherit our crit, so they can use Thief. They will not inherit your crit hit damage, and they will not inherit your penetration. So Mage or Thief if you are a full-on pet Sork build and you're not doing a lot of crazy stuff. So if you're just running like Twilight, Atronach, the Imp, and you're kind of doing a very simplistic like Beastmaster build or something goofy like that, then Thief is going to be for you. So there's the updated version. Now we'll go back into the original, and then I'll also add some updated stuff for when we get to the traits. Okay, I accidentally streamed what I had just talked about. Hopefully, if you guys saw that, I hope you enjoyed. But what I want to talk about is I updated the trait section. I removed it completely from the original stream that happened yesterday. I believe it was Saturday. But I only was able to test Precise and Sharpened in that stream, and now I've come back with the updated list. And since I accidentally streamed it, and it was like a 20-minute discussion, I'm going to keep things short because I'm kind of tired. So in terms of order for traits in the solo application on what I tested, I'm not going to say this is going to be ideal in every instance, and I will talk about deviation, but Shadow or Charged plus the Shock Enchant is winning for solo application because it applies minor vulnerability at an 84% chance every 4 seconds with a proc. Minor vulnerability from the concussed status effect lasts 4 seconds. So in solo application, when I'm doing a robust parse, it was up 68% of the time. So it was really, really strong, and my DPS skyrocketed. I almost pulled 37k, which is a pretty big difference compared to other traits. But this is something that only 1 or 2 people would need to actually do in a group, because if you have everyone running it, then you're constantly refreshing minor vulnerability, and there's no advantage to it. If it's up 100% or 90% of the time, you don't need to have someone else give up that Berserker enchant, a precise trait, all that power to get 10% more uptime out of it. So this is a one-person sort of thing. It works really well in solo, and it works really, really well as a raid DPS or group DPS enabler. Healers can run it, but it is very difficult and demanding in terms of you have to constantly make sure you're proccing it. The other thing is I didn't use Force Pulse, so that uptime would go from about 68 to probably 80, maybe 90% uptime if I was using Force Pulse instead. And then once we get into Execute, it would start to dip because I would be using Impale instead of Force Pulse. So that is something to keep in mind. But the charge with the Shock Enchant is disgusting. Best trait combo for solo application, it needs to have Shock. Then second place came Precise. Again, Shadow is really strong. We have a lot of points into Elfborn. It's going to scale in a group with Aggressive Warhorn, Minor Force, all these really powerful buffs, so Precise is the second best. If you're completely solo, however, and you don't have access to Major Breach, then Sharpened will probably become a little bit more powerful because you're missing so much penetration if you're not using Major Breach, you're not using Lover, all that sorts of stuff. So that's when Sharp starts to kind of take up the pack when you're missing too much penetration. Now, in solo application, when I did these parses, I had Major Breach because I needed Ellie Drain, so I ran that for myself. But if I was in Maelstrom Arena, I would need a Damage Shield instead. So that is something to keep in mind. In third place, that's when Nirn came in. Nirn actually did pretty well. However, it did lose quite a large power spike compared to Precise. So Charge was about 37k, Precise was 33 to 34k, and then Nirn dropped to about 32.4k, 32.8k, and then Sharpened was, for me, it was like 32.3k, so it has the potential to beat Nirn, but again, it would beat Precise too if I wasn't running Breach. And then underneath that was the Charged Flame Staff. Now, the reason why that didn't do too hot is because we don't have combustion or anything. So the uptime did help in terms of burning DPS. I went from about 700 average burning DPS on non-charged flame enchant staffs to about 1600. So it almost doubled the DPS out of it. Really, really powerful. If you're a Dragonite, it'll be even more. However, if you're a Dragonite, you're already applying burned more frequently than everyone else, so you kind of gets into this realm of you're applying it too much that you're not getting anything or as much power as possible out of it. So it's not crazy strong, but it is very nice, and it's very, very helpful for enabling raid DPS because anyone attacking a burning target with Wall of Fire does 20% bonus damage with Wall of Fire. Burning enemies take 20% damage from this ability. So again, that's another instance of raid enabling DPS. So it's very, very powerful as a support thing. But it was second last place in terms of DPS. And then last was Infused, and that's because the Infused enchant, at least on our front bar with a non-Maelstrom staff, is not applying to the light attack damage. So even though when we swap off of our Maelstrom staff, and after casting Blockade of Fire, even if we swap off, we'll retain the enchant. However, the Infused enchant, if I had it on my front bar, it is not applying to that. So the only way Infused would be strong is if you're front barring a Maelstrom Inferno Staff with the Infused trait. I don't have one, so I don't know where it would fall under. I would assume it'd probably still be weaker than Charged or Precise just because you're not gaining tremendous DPS. You're gaining maybe like 500 to 1,000 extra light and heavy attack damage, so it's not going to do anything astronomical, but it will probably beat the Charged Flame Staff at least. Still, it's not operating the same way as it is with Dual Wield in terms of the Maelstrom Bow, so this just reinforces the idea that Infused itself is bugged. It's not applying to everything, it's not consistent, it's too strong, it doesn't make any fucking sense. So just another reason why Infused needs to get fixed, and another reason why in some instances where it could use a buff or some other interaction. So I did use the Infused staff with a Berserker enchant so that we had more uptime. The other thing is that with the Infused trait, you can keep up Berserk 100% of the time, but the issue is you need to be on that bar every 5 seconds, and if you're doing a robust rotation, that's not going to happen. When I had so if I just had like my Precise staff with the Berserker enchant at a base, that uptime was roughly 40 to 47%. And then when I had the infused, even though theoretically it could be up 100%, it was only up 60 to 70% of the uptime. So we're not getting that huge power spike as we would on paper. So infused not doing too hot for Magicka builds, still ideal for Stam because it is broken, but hopefully that gets fixed and it won't be as nearly as overpowered, because currently it's operating like an extra 6k DPS on stamina when used with a poison enchant, a Berserker offhand, and a Maelstrom bow. So Magicka not operating the same way, but hopefully that gives an idea of trait stuff. We'll investigate more deeply. If you want to hear more mathematics discussion, you can check out the stream that I did. I will have that linked in the description. Otherwise, wait until Horns of the Reach launches and I've done a more robust test, because I don't have to worry about this changing every other week. So again, hope that gave an idea, and then we'll continue with what was in the original stream. But now let's go back into looking at the things so that we can examine them. So again, the Thief standard dual sharp, everything was consistent. 90% minor berserk uptime, relatively going to be identical as we look through things. 31.8k. Then we look at the Lover with standard dual sharp. I jump up to 32.4k. Again, minor berserk. We do see a 3% difference there. And if we look at some of the damage parses, it's like 166 light attacks, 164, 196 blockade ticks, 183. Okay, well then why is it missing 16 here? Well, because one parse was longer than the other. I have a 4-second duration difference, so I might have not have casted blockade if I'm ending the fight sooner. 23 assassin will procs, 24. So everything is very relative in terms of very, very consistent. So that's just showing like, hey, there's not going to be a lot of convoluting variables here. Now when I jump to Thief plus Precise and Sharp, I jump to 32.8k. For some reason, here. The Shadow is, Shadow with Dual Sharp was 32.7k. And then now I've changed to Precise Front Bar, and I'm going to go look at Thief with Precise. I go to 32.8k. So obviously, we see Precise is even beating Sharp when I have Thief, because just gaining that crit chance is really, really helpful. So we see a really big spike in terms of crit chances from other ones, which crit is king in Elder Scrolls Online. It's going to be the same no matter what. Now here's a Lover plus Precise. We jump all the way down to 32.4k. So this is where I was talking about, where the Lover is often going to lose to Thief, because crit chance is just so strong, in losing that humongous power spike of that like 13% crit chance from Thief. We already have so much penetration from the concentration passive, so we're not going to really gain anything out of it. Like, yeah, they're very close in terms of DPS, but we still see Thief is beating them. Oh, there I was getting some information. Here, what was I wearing? I think this is just another Julianos with, this is Shadow plus Precise plus Julianos parse. 32.9k, almost 33k. Now, next, what is this one? This was looking at proc sets, so I was changing monster sets a little bit. So I tested the Doma House set here, because I was like, remember we talked a little bit about in the introduction where I was like, the Doma House set is only going to be good for a caster build who can make utilization out of the spell damage for sitting in it and the damage proc itself. So if we quick peek at the Doma House set, I don't think I have it on this tune, but the duration of the buff and the damage lasts 10 seconds, and it has a 15-second cooldown. So that means if it's up 100%, that's 66.6 repeating uptime. We see I have a 66% uptime on Doma House, so it's literally proccing off cooldown for me over this fight. Yet it only does 813 DPS, and it's losing to Grothdar, and this is with Grothdar. So Grothdar does 1100 DPS. It's also going to have my Burning do a little bit more. We see 852 DPS out of Burning here, and on here it only does 123 because I'm not proccing Burning nearly as much because I don't have that extra source. Because Doma House is really fucking buggy. It does flame damage. It should proc burning by all means, but it's just not proccing it nearly as frequently. And the proc only did 813 damage, and then that 200 spell damage that I'm gaining out of it isn't really bringing me anywhere crazy. We see my average with Grothdar is 3,231 max spell damage, and then when we look at the Doma House parse, it's 3,471. So gaining like 200 spell damage, but I'm losing that raw damage in that Magicka from Grothdar. So Doma House really dropping the ball. Not going to be a great set in any way, shape, or form, sadly. Here we look at Lich Crystal. So I put on Narayanith. So I drop all the way down to 30.6k. Even though Lich Crystal, the proc, is doing 1,000 DPS, so like roughly 100, 200 less than Grothdar, but the really big DPS loss with this was losing all of that max Magicka. We lost, let's see, my max Magicka is 4,000 or 42k with Narayanith, and with Grothdar it is 43.7k. So I'm losing 1,700 Magicka, and I'm losing a lot of DPS because of it. So Narayanith's DPS boost did help it in terms of the deficit, but you're still going to lose a lot of damage because that max health bonus instead of max Magicka. Now again, remember, it's kind of like Sun, where it's like, hey, a dead DPS does no DPS, so maybe you do need that extra health. Well, Narayanith is in a much better place now. And I did use funnel health with this, and I could have used Force Pulse and seen Narayanith proc chance go up even more. That would have lowered the deficit a little bit, but I wanted to keep things consistent because that would mean I'm also giving up healing. So here I look at Valkynscoria. Valkynscoria doing very well. 1,400 DPS from the proc alone, and that's single target, so in AoE it would be even more. So we're just under 32k. Again, the reason it's losing to Grothdar is because I don't have as much max Magicka, but still doing much better than than Narayanith. Here, again, I have another Grothdar parse. I wonder why that's there. Here we have an Alambris parse. So in order to get Alambris to proc, I had to use a lightning backbar. Since I only used a lightning backbar and I didn't use shock clench or anything like that, the uptime on Alambris is really low. And we can only see the fire parse of Alambris, which did roughly 600, almost 700, and then the shock parse did another like 200 DPS. So if you're going to use Alambris on a Magicka Nightblade, you're going to want to play it as a ranged option, and instead of using Ellie Drain, which ideally in a group you're not going to have to run that, you'd be using Shock Clench instead, so that you have a higher chance to proc Alambris. But if I would have used Shock Clench instead of Ellie Drain, I would have lost Sustain and I would have lost Major Breach, so that would have convoluted results a lot. So Alambris is actually much better than this is showing, and it's a very strong option if you are not able to get in melee form. It's going to beat Grothdar, obviously, if you can't get into melee. It's going to be our second best DPS option. This is not really good results or showing that, because I wasn't able to run things that I'd have to change in order for it to proc more. Here I change into 5-piece Necropotence, so I go back to Grothdar. I'm going to keep that consistent, and now I'm just changing my gear set. So I go into Necro. A lot of people said, Gilliam, why didn't you test Necropotence on the Magicka Nightblade? Well, we see, because it's fucking trash. My max Magicka has jumped all the way to 51, almost 52k Magicka, and you'd say, wow, that's a lot. He must be doing a lot of DPS. But I do lose a lot of Magicka on my back bar with my Impale because I'm not able to run Inner Light. I have to run Corrode, my pet, and the pet only does 900 DPS. I didn't take the dual shades. I think that would have done maybe 1100 DPS if I would have had the double shades. So it would have looked a little bit nicer, but the biggest issue with Necropotence is losing so much spell damage and crit. We look at the max value for spell damage and spell crit, and they are abysmal. Only 55% crit chance and under 3k spell damage, versus with other stuff we're almost at 3k, 66% crit chance, 3200 with Falcon. So Necropotence is not really going to be ideal in any way, shape, or form, and it's why I excluded it from the video when I did that. Here I'm trying to see which parse this one is. I think this is Spinners. Or no, this is Mother's Sorrow, because I have Shadow and I have 72% crit chance. So this is Mother's Sorrow. So Mother's Sorrow isn't awful, but it's only pulling 32.3k DPS. If you remember, Julianos did 32.9k DPS. So even though we saw, oh hey, all these crit bonuses are getting amped, so Mother's Sorrow should clearly be good now, right? Well, the power of Mother's Sorrow before wasn't that it had a 2 and 4 piece crit chance, it was that its 5 piece crit chance was so high. It was like 1600 spell crit. Now that 2 through 4 piece bonuses have been amped to about 1066, that deficit from, or the gap between a 2 piece and a 5 piece, you're only gaining like 2% crit chance out of the 5 piece compared to a 2 through 4 piece. So Mother's Sorrow and Leviathan, for that matter, both, they need their 5 piece to get that 55% damage bonus, or the crit chance amp, in order for these sets to be any good. Because right now it's just like I'm pretty much wearing a slightly weaker, or a slightly stronger 2 through 4 piece bonus instead of gaining like this huge power spike from a 5 piece. So unfortunately, Mother's Sorrow is not bringing it to the table. It's not awful. It's great if you need like a jewelry set for BOE. You can pair it with Julie and do really, really well for a BOE beginner player. But in terms of endgame, it's not where it needs to be. Now I believe this one is Spinner. So even though I'm gaining penetration, I was able to lose some points out of spell erosion and start placing them elsewhere. I only jump up to 31.5k. So we're seeing a deficit. Instead of just wearing a bunch of crit from Mother's Sorrow, I'm actually weaker than just having that extra pen from Spinners. So Spinners still is not a PvE set. I could have changed it a little bit and probably ran Thief. It would have been probably about 32k. But ultimately, it's still not going to be a good PvE DPS option. Next, this is Twiceborn Star. So Twiceborn Star is pretty much identical to Spinners, just a little bit stronger. So I paired the Lover in Shadow for the first one, and then I'll also test Thief in Shadow. But we see 31.6k almost DPS. Again, really not wowing the crowd with this. Pretty disappointing. And then the Thief in Shadow, now that we've lost Lover and went with Thief, again, this is what I was talking about, how Thief is just crushing Lover in terms of like efficiency. I dropped that and I gain almost 900 DPS, almost 1000 DPS from just dropping Lover and gaining Thief, because I'm gaining that huge spike of crit chance. So Twiceborn Star is actually beating Mother's Sorrow, if I recall. So it's still a really nice BOE crafted set. You could even wear Mother's Sorrow and Twiceborn Star, although I would probably suggest Julianos. The one advantage of Twiceborn that Julie will not have is you have bonus health and you have bonus stamina. So you're just tankier in general. You're able to run, block, dodge, sprint, all that great stuff. So it's a little bit more beginner friendly. So that will be a really nice setup for beginner players. But again, in terms of endgame performance, it's not where it needs to be. Here I'm trying to think. I'm not 100% sure what this parse is. I have the Thief Mundus Stone there. Probably just a redundant one. And then here I am on my Dragonite. So I believe this first parse was Julianos, if I recall. So I'm using Precise and Shadow on DK because that's going to win as well. So I do my first parse with Julianos, 33.8k. Then I put on Sun. Yeah, because my spell damage has gone down, but my max health has gone up. Yeah, we can see in the fucking corner, it says Sun. So yeah, Sun is actually losing by 1000 DPS compared to Julie, because we see my crit chance. I went from 60% crit chance to 50% crit chance. So really, really unfortunate, and it's showing on my crit values. We see like a humongous drop. Like before, it's like 60, almost 70, 60, hooray, critting for everyone. And then we drop 44, 50, 48, 39. Really, so The gap is probably a little bit smaller because we do see a lot of crit variability in this one. I probably should have done a second parse for this. It was more unlucky than anything, but Sun is still losing to Julianos because that 10% crit chance is monstrous in helping us out. And then we have Burning Spellweave here, 33.4k. So yeah, what is it? 33.8k for Julie. So it looks like it's beating Burning Spellweave. Or wait, no, that is Julie. 33.4k for Sun. We see 59% uptime. So I was really unlucky with this parse. If I would have had 61%, 62%, Burning Spellweave would have destroyed Julian. Well, not destroyed, but it would have beaten Julianos. So in this parse, it's not going to look like it. Now, the reason why that is because I have to self-buff. So I have to cast things like Ellie Drain for myself, which is going to mean I have less chances to proc Spellweave at a more consistent rate. So if I was doing a real parse where I had someone come in for me and I applied those things for me, that's when Burning Spellweave started to beat Julianos. So in solo play, Julie's still going to beat Spellweave because it's BoE, it's easier to do, it's consistent, you can be defensive with it, you don't lose out of it. But when you have a group setup where all of these things are given to you, that's when Burning Spellweave is going to start shining. We look at Burning Spellweave's burning DPS. 2,000 DPS out of burning. Insane. And then we go back and we look at the Julie parse. That's only 1,800 DPS. And then we look at, what is that? Sun, 1,850. So we're gaining about 150 DPS per target because Burning Spellweave will apply burning to multiple targets in terms of DPS. And again, it could be even higher. So that burning proc really helped Burning Spellweave become more enticing. And the other bonus that Burning Spellweave has is like, oh, hey, it's only 200 DPS on burning. But if we look at my Blockade of Fire, that DPS also went up as well because I was able to have burning up more frequently. So I had that 20% chance or the 20% bonus damage out of Wall of Fire burning more frequently. So Burning Spellweave is back. It's still going to have some variability where it's like dependent on your luck. So if you're a more traditional player and you like conservative stuff and you're like, I just want the flat amp, I don't care if I gain 100, 200, 300 DPS, then Julie is going to be still ideal for you. But if you are the min-maxer and you are able to get into a group that is applying these debuffs for you, then Burning Spellweave will win. And then I just started doing some testing on the Nightblade. This is where I had changed the poison weapon enchant to my front bar, so I jumped up to 40k on the first parse. Here I'm just getting some screenshots. I looked at the Pillar of Nirn set on stamina as well, so I started investigating some of the gear sets for Stam. Pillar of Nirn did, let's see, 873 from the bleed, and then 200 from the proc, so 1k DPS from the 5-piece. Really, really shitty set. Here we have Blood Drinker. Now, the reason I don't use Rend with this set is because Rend is not actually a bleed. It visually looks like it. You literally cut people and they start oozing blood, but it doesn't ignore armor and it is not buffed by the 20% bonus of Blood Drinker. So our Rending Slash's DPS does go up. All that stuff. I think I also do a test with Twin Blade and Blunt. It was probably a little bit weaker than Blade Cloak actually there. Yeah, I can just barely see it. It does 1,000, 1,100 DPS. It got cut off. So Blood Drinker set, again, not a good PvE set. In PvP, it'll be very strong with an axe, with rending slashes rather. All that stuff. You could even run a set like Twin Sisters, which also applies a bleed, because bleeds ignore armor and they ignore block. So in PvP, mitigation and block is more relevant because bosses don't block very much. So ignoring that's going to be very powerful as a tank killer. And then in this parse, I combined Pillar and Blood together, and we just see my DPS go way, way down. Before I was using Vicious Ophidian as a static. And then again, I look at another parse with the with the Stamina Nightblade, where I have the Poison Weapon enchant on front bar, and I almost hit 42k over a burst thing, and I have to apply buffs for myself. I don't have someone applying Major Fracture or anything like that. So Yeah, I learned really quickly that the poisoned weapon enchant is better on, or the poison enchant is better on infused than the berserker enchant, because the berserker enchant still gets the infused, but the poison weapon gets a larger, more frequent bonus out of it because it's proccing every 2 seconds instead of every 4 seconds. Because infused, the bug, it's only getting the 30% bonus. It's not also getting the cooldown reduction. So the poison enchant is just fucking nuts on that thing. And I think that covers, yeah, and we get back to the... So that covers all of the gear set looks. I think I did also look at Spider Cultist somewhere in that parse. Maybe I didn't take a screenshot of it, because people were like, why use Elegance instead of Spider Cultist? Well, I used Spider Cultist and it lost to Elegance. I don't think I got the screenshots for that. But the one thing that I did have to change with Spider Cultist was instead of running Shooting Star, I had to run Ellie Rage because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten the bonus. And instead of running Funnel Health, I had to run Force Pulse because those wouldn't have gotten the bonus either. So I had to fit into the favor or playing around the set, which was the Cultist set, which is like 450 bonus spell damage to your Destructive Staff ability. Yeah, I don't think I got the screen. But it did like under 32k DPS. It was nothing special. So there's the edited stream. Again, I cut like an hour and 10 minutes out, actually a little bit more, and I updated some of the information. Now, I did not do a scathing parse yet, so that will come either Monday or Tuesday with the stream. We'll talk more about Scathing Mage on the Magicka Nightblade. We'll look at it on the Magicka Warden too, because I know a lot of people have been asking about that. Excuse me. So that is one thing that I forgot to... I talked about it in the stream. I didn't get screenshots of it for some reason. Scathing Mage, there's a really long discussion about it in terms of why it's still good. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely not nearly as important to get. So if you have Scathing Mage, don't feel like you wasted time, but realize that it isn't going to be something that you always wear these days. It's going to be something you carry with you. Like in a single target fight, if you're not able to sustain Force Pulse, if you're having a hard time, if you're being more mobile, then Scathing Mage isn't going to be ideal. You're going to want Julie. However, if you're doing AoE and you can do lots of lightning heavy attacks or sap essence, then Scathing Mage's uptime is going to be phenomenal. And then if you're doing a single target fight where you're able to just keep pewing the lasers, sitting there AFK dealing DPS, then Scathing Mage will beat Julianos in most instances, especially if you're using Force Pulse. So there's a little discussion about that. If you want more insights on gear sets, we talk about Necropotence, why it's good on Sorks. We talk about lots of more gear set options for Magicka builds in the stream. I cut a lot of it out because I know that not everything is wanted to be heard. So if you're interested in that, you can go listen to the original stream again. It's in the link in the description. But hopefully that has given the idea, or given some ideas of where we're headed with Horns of the Reach for Magicka builds. I know I focused a lot on Magicka Nightblade, a little bit on DK. We talk more about gear sets for Dragonite in this stream as well. So if you want that. But again, hope this has helped. And then I'll see you guys either on Monday or Tuesday for additional testing in terms of talking about my findings over today, tomorrow, that sort of thing for Scathing Mage, the little mini things that I forgot to test, as well as any potential changes that come with the PTS update, if there is going to be one. Until then, I will see you guys around.